Commander Sarah Chen stepped into the lecture hall aboard the massive Galactic Defense Academy station orbiting Kepler 442b. The amphitheater stretched before her like a bowl carved from polished metal, its tiered seats filled with cadets from 17 different species. Blue-skinned Vorthak sat alongside crystalline Zephyrians, while the insectoid Krex clicked their mandibles in what passed for whispered conversations. At the podium, Professor Talvar, a distinguished Altarian with silver scales that caught the artificial lighting, gestured toward a massive holographic display. Three-dimensional models of various warship designs rotated slowly in the air, each one a masterpiece of alien engineering. The Vorthak dreadnought gleamed with meter-thick armor plating that could withstand direct hits from plasma cannons. The Zephyrian cruiser showed off its crystalline defensive matrices that could deflect energy weapons with prismatic efficiency. The Krex battleship bristled with chitinous armor that could regenerate minor damage during combat. Sarah found her assigned seat in the human section, noting how the other species seemed to cluster together while maintaining respectful distances. She pulled out her datapad and activated the translation matrix, though her implants already handled most of the universal trade language being spoken. Professor Talvar's voice resonated through the hall's acoustic dampeners. Today we examine defensive capabilities across our alliance's naval architectures. Each species has developed unique approaches to protecting their vessels during combat operations. The hologram shifted to display cross-sections of the ships, revealing the intricate layers of protection each design employed. The Vorthak dreadnought's armor was a complex sandwich of dense metals and energy-absorbing composites, each layer serving a specific function in deflecting or dissipating incoming attacks. The professor's pointer traced along the defensive systems with obvious admiration. A young Krex cadet raised one of his four arms. "Professor, the Vorthak design shows remarkable efficiency in mass distribution. How does their armor-to-firepower ratio compare with other Alliance members?" Talvar manipulated the display, bringing up statistical comparisons. "Excellent question, Cadet Zixthor. The Vorthak maintain a 3.2 to 1 ratio of defensive mass to offensive capability. This allows them to absorb tremendous punishment while maintaining combat effectiveness." The hologram cycled through more examples. Each ship design told a story of evolutionary warfare doctrine. The Altarians favored energy shields that could be modulated across different frequencies. The hegemony races used adaptive armor that could shift its molecular structure based on incoming threat types. Every design philosophy represented centuries of refinement and battlefield experience. Sarah watched her fellow human cadets taking notes with varying degrees of interest. Most seemed impressed by the alien technologies, though she noticed a few exchanging glances that suggested they found something amusing about the presentations. She wondered if they were thinking the same thing she was. An hour into the lecture, Professor Talvar activated a new section of the hologram. "Now we'll examine some of the more unique defensive approaches developed by our newer Alliance members." The first display showed a Centaurian battlecruiser with its distinctive flowing armor that could liquid shift during combat to present different defensive angles. The second revealed a Terminus Guild destroyer with modular armor plates that could be jettisoned and replaced mid-battle by automated systems. Then the display changed, and Sarah felt the familiar mixture of pride and concern that always accompanied seeing human warship designs presented to alien audiences. The holographic projection showed the UNS Defiance, a typical human-heavy cruiser, rotating slowly in the display matrix. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Several cadets from different species leaned forward in their seats, their various forms of optical organs focusing intently on the human ship. Whispered conversations broke out in at least 6 different languages, and Sarah's translation implants caught fragments of confusion and surprise. The human warship looked fundamentally different from everything else they had seen. Where other ships were layered with visible armor plating, energy shielding arrays, or defensive superstructures, the Defiance appeared almost naked by comparison. Its hull was sleek and purposeful, but to alien eyes trained to recognize defensive capabilities, it must have looked like a ship that had been stripped of its protection. Professor Talvar paused his presentation, clearly noting the stirring among his students. His silver scales shifted color slightly, a sign of confusion among his species. The human design represents a rather unusual approach to combat vessel architecture. A Vorthak cadet near the front raised her hand. "Professor, where are the defensive arrays? I don't see any armor plating or shielding generators." Talvar manipulated the hologram to show cross-sections of the human ship. The internal structure became visible, revealing corridors, equipment bays, weapon systems, and crew quarters. What was notably absent were the thick armor layers or energy shield generators that characterized every other ship design they had studied. The human approach appears to minimize traditional defensive systems in favor of— Talvar paused, consulting his notes. Enhanced mobility and offensive capabilities. The Zephyrian cadet's crystalline form chimed with what Sarah's implants translated as concerned confusion. But how do they survive combat? Without proper shielding or armor, even a minor hit could cause catastrophic damage. More cadets began speaking up, their voices creating a growing murmur of disbelief and curiosity. Sarah could see representatives from warrior cultures like the Kreks looking particularly puzzled. To species that had evolved their military doctrines around the principle of outlasting their enemies, the human approach must have seemed like tactical suicide. A young Altarian officer candidate stood up. "Professor, perhaps there's an error in the database? This design doesn't match any known combat doctrine. No species builds warships without adequate protection." Professor Talvar's scales shifted through several color variations, indicating deep thought mixed with professional uncertainty. He had been teaching military academy courses for 40 standard years, and nothing in his experience had prepared him to explain the human approach to warfare. Every species in the galactic community had developed along similar strategic lines. You built ships that could take damage and keep fighting. You protected your crews and equipment with the best defensive systems your technology could provide. You planned for extended engagements where the side with superior defensive capabilities would eventually wear down their opponents. The humans had apparently missed that particular lecture in interstellar warfare fundamentals. "The design specifications are correct," Talvar finally admitted. "Human warships do indeed carry minimal defensive systems compared to our standards. Their hull plating is primarily structural rather than armor-focused. They deploy limited energy shielding, mainly against radiation and minor debris rather than weapons." The hall erupted into dozens of conversations as cadets from different species tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Sarah watched a group of hegemony students gesticulating wildly, their tentacles weaving complex patterns that she recognized as expressions of profound confusion. Near the back, several Terminus Guild cadets were performing rapid calculations on their devices, probably trying to determine how long a human ship could survive against any properly armed opponent. The mathematical conclusions they were reaching were obviously not favorable to human life expectancy in combat situations. Professor Talvar raised one of his scaled hands for attention. "Perhaps we should consider that different species develop different solutions to the challenges of space warfare. The human approach may represent innovation we haven't fully understood." But even as he spoke, Sarah could see the doubt in his posture. The professor was trying to be diplomatic, but the evidence before them suggested that humans had either discovered some revolutionary new approach to combat or had somehow managed to join the galactic community despite being catastrophically bad at building warships. A Krex cadet clicked his mandibles in what Sarah knew was their equivalent of nervous laughter. "Professor, with respect to our human colleagues, This design appears to be more suitable for a transport vessel than a warship. How do they expect to survive their first engagement? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt the attention of hundreds of alien cadets turning toward the human section of the amphitheater. Her fellow humans sat quietly, some looking uncomfortable with the scrutiny, others maintaining carefully neutral expressions. She realized that everyone was waiting for an answer that could explain how humanity had managed to earn membership in the Galactic Defense Alliance, despite apparently building warships that violated every known principle of military engineering. The silence stretched longer, becoming more pointed with each passing moment. Professor Talvar cleared his throat, his scales shifting to colors that indicated diplomatic caution. Perhaps one of our human cadets could provide insight into their species' naval doctrine? All eyes turned to the human section. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized this was exactly the kind of moment that could either build bridges between species. Lieutenant Marcus Webb stood up from his seat in the back row, his movement causing several alien heads to turn in his direction. Sarah recognized him from their earlier orientation sessions. Webb was a veteran of the Outer Rim conflicts, one of the few human cadets who had actual combat experience before joining the academy. His relaxed posture and steady gaze suggested he wasn't intimidated by the hundreds of alien eyes now focused on him. "Why are our warships missing armor?" Webb repeated the implied question, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That's an interesting way to phrase it." Professor Talvar's scales shifted to an encouraging blue-green. "Please, Lieutenant Webb, help us understand the human approach to combat vessel design." Webb walked down the steps toward the center of the amphitheater, his movement drawing attention from every species present. Sarah noticed how differently he carried himself compared to the alien cadets. Where they moved with the careful precision of beings who had evolved to survive in hostile environments, Webb moved with the fluid confidence of a predator that had never learned to fear anything. "The thing is," Webb began, his voice carrying easily through the hall's acoustics, "you're all asking the wrong question. You want to know why our ships don't have armor, but the real question is, why do yours need it?" A ripple of confusion passed through the alien cadets. The Vorthak, who had asked the original question, leaned forward, her blue-tinted features showing obvious puzzlement. "I don't understand. Ships need armor to survive combat. This is basic military doctrine." Webb nodded thoughtfully. "Right. Your ships need armor to survive combat. But see, that assumes you're going to get hit." He gestured toward the holographic display, where the human warships still rotated beside the heavily armored alien vessels. "Every one of your designs is built around the idea that combat means two forces meeting, exchanging fire, and seeing who can outlast the other. You build thick armor because you plan to sit there and take punishment until the other guy gives up." The Krex cadet, who had compared human ships to transports, clicked his mandibles in what might have been disagreement. "What other approach exists? Combat requires engaging the enemy." Webb's smile widened. "Oh, we engage the enemy, all right. We just don't stick around to see how they feel about it." Professor Talvar manipulated the holographic controls, bringing up tactical displays alongside the ship designs. "Could you elaborate on human combat doctrine, Lieutenant?" Webb moved closer to the hologram, pointing at the human cruiser's sleek profile. "Look at this ship again. Really look at it. What do you see?" A young Zephyrian spoke up, her crystalline form chiming with uncertainty. "A vessel with inadequate protection and oversized engines?" "Exactly." Webb's enthusiasm was obvious. "Oversized engines. This ship can accelerate at 12 Gs for extended periods. It can change direction faster than your targeting computers can compensate. It can go from 0 to 20% of light speed in less time than it takes most of your ships to charge their main weapons." He activated his personal data pad and linked it to the classroom display. New information appeared alongside the ship's specifications. Human warships aren't designed to survive getting hit. They're designed to never get hit in the first place. The tactical display showed movement patterns, with the human ship's course plotted as a series of impossible curves and sudden direction changes. Sarah watched the alien cadets studying the information with growing amazement and concern. An Altarian cadet near the middle of the hall spoke up. "But what about when you must engage enemy vessels directly? Surely you cannot avoid all combat." Webb's expression shifted to something that made Sarah slightly uncomfortable. It was the look of someone remembering things that others might prefer to forget. "We don't avoid combat. We redefine it." He manipulated the display again, bringing up combat footage from the Outer Rim conflicts. The hologram now showed actual battle recordings, with human ships moving through space in ways that defied conventional military thinking. The vessels appeared and disappeared like ghosts, striking targets with devastating precision before vanishing again into the void. "This is from the Battle of Kepler Station," Webb explained. 3 human destroyers against a pirate fleet of 12 heavy cruisers. Traditional doctrine would say we were outnumbered 4-1 and should have retreated. The footage showed human ships moving in coordinated patterns that looked more like a deadly dance than conventional naval combat. They appeared from unexpected angles, delivered devastating strikes, and disappeared before enemy weapons could track them effectively. The pirate vessels, heavily armored and designed for traditional combat, found themselves unable to bring their superior firepower to bear against targets that refused to stay in one place long enough to hit. A hegemony cadet's tentacles writhed with what Sarah's implants translated as nervous excitement. "How do your crews survive those acceleration patterns? The G-forces would be lethal to most species." Webb nodded acknowledgement. "That's part of it. Humans can handle higher acceleration than most species. Our bones are denser, our cardiovascular systems more robust. But it's not just biological. We use acceleration couches, inertial dampeners, and medical support systems that let us push our ships harder than anyone else." He changed the display to show the interior of a human warship during combat operations. The crew members were locked into elaborate restraint systems, their bodies supported by technology that allowed them to function while experiencing forces that would incapacitate or kill most alien species. "But the real advantage isn't technological," Webb continued. "It's philosophical. Most species think of space combat as naval warfare translated to 3 dimensions. Ships line up, exchange broadsides, and the stronger force wins. But humans think of space combat as aerial warfare in an infinite sky." The distinction seemed to puzzle many of the alien cadets. Professor Talvar's scales shifted through several colors before settling on one that indicated deep concentration. "Could you explain the difference?" Webb gestured toward the still-rotating ship models. "Naval warfare is about controlling territory and maintaining formations. You build heavy ships that can take damage and keep fighting because you need to hold your position. But aerial warfare is about speed, surprise, and positioning. You build fast, maneuverable craft because the first rule is don't be where the enemy expects you to be." A Vorthak cadet raised her hand. "But surely there are situations where direct confrontation is unavoidable? What happens when human ships must engage in sustained combat?" Webb's expression became more serious. "Then we change the rules of engagement." He brought up new footage, this time from a much larger battle. The display showed human fleet formations that looked nothing like the orderly arrangements favored by other species. Instead of neat lines or defensive clusters, human ships moved in complex, 3-dimensional patterns that seemed almost organic in their fluidity. "This is from the liberation of Proxima Station," Webb explained. "The enemy had a fortified position with overlapping defensive fields and heavy artillery. Traditional assault doctrine would have required a frontal attack with massive casualties." The footage showed human ships approaching the station from dozens of different vectors, their movements coordinated but seemingly chaotic. They struck different targets simultaneously, creating cascading failures in the station's defensive systems. What should have been a siege lasting weeks was over in less than 6 hours. A Krex cadet clicked his mandibles in what might have been admiration or concern. Your tactics appear to rely heavily on surprise and confusion. What happens when facing an enemy who adapts to your approach? Webb's smile returned, but it was darker now. Then we adapt faster. The classroom fell into a contemplative silence as hundreds of alien minds processed what they had learned. Sarah could see the cadets from warrior cultures like the Krex and Vorthak studying the tactical displays with particular intensity. These were species that had built their entire military philosophies around strength and endurance, and they were being confronted with an approach that seemed to make those virtues irrelevant. Professor Talvar broke the silence. Lieutenant Webb, this is fascinating insight into human combat doctrine. But I must ask, how do you handle casualties when your ships do take damage? Without heavy armor or defensive systems, even minor hits must cause significant losses. Webb paused, and Sarah could see him choosing his words carefully. Professor, you're still thinking in terms of traditional combat. Yes, when a human ship gets hit, the damage is usually catastrophic. Our ships don't survive major weapons impacts the way yours do. Several alien cadets exchanged concerned glances. The Zephyrian who had spoken earlier chimed with what sounded like alarm. Then how do you maintain combat effectiveness? Military doctrine requires accepting casualties to achieve objectives. Webb looked directly at her, his expression completely serious. We don't accept casualties. We eliminate threats before they can cause casualties. He manipulated the display one more time, bringing up comparative statistics from various conflicts. The numbers that appeared caused audible gasps from several Species A Terminus Guild cadet near the back of the amphitheater stood up, his mechanical augmentations whirring softly as he moved. Lieutenant Webb, with respect, your doctrine sounds impressive in theory. But what happens when you face an enemy that matches your speed and maneuverability? What happens when someone builds ships specifically designed to counter your advantages? Webb turned toward the guild cadet, his expression thoughtful. That's an excellent question, cadet. Vex 7, the augmented being replied. My species has considerable experience with adaptive military technologies. Any successful combat doctrine eventually faces opposition specifically designed to neutralize it. Webb nodded slowly. You're absolutely right, and we've encountered exactly that problem. He manipulated the display again, bringing up classified combat footage that made several alien cadets lean forward with interest. The hologram now showed a battle unlike the previous examples. The enemy vessels moved with fluid grace that matched the human ships, their designs clearly influenced by studying human tactical approaches. This is from the recent conflict with the Helix Coalition, Webb explained. They had studied our combat records and built ships specifically to counter our advantages. Fast, maneuverable vessels with distributed armor and rapid-fire weapons designed to create kill zones we couldn't dance around. The footage showed human ships struggling against enemies that seemed to anticipate their every move. For the first time in the presentation, human vessels were taking damage, their sleek hulls erupting in silent explosions as enemy fire found its mark. Sarah felt a chill watching the footage. She knew the Coalition War had been humanity's first real test against an enemy that had adapted specifically to counter human advantages, but seeing the actual combat records drove home how close they had come to disaster. A young Altarian cadet spoke up, her voice carrying a note of concern. What was the outcome? How did humanity adapt when your primary advantages were neutralized? Webb paused the footage at a moment that showed a human cruiser spiraling out of control, its hull breached in multiple locations. We learned something important. When you build a military doctrine around avoiding damage rather than absorbing it, you need to be very, very good at avoiding damage. He advanced the footage, and the display now showed the same battle from a wider perspective. What had looked like a human defeat was actually something far more complex. The damaged ships weren't fleeing randomly, they were moving in precise patterns that drew enemy forces into specific positions. The thing about human combat doctrine, Webb continued, is that it's not really about individual ship performance. It's about systems thinking. When our ships can't take hits, we have to ensure that the enemy can't deliver hits effectively. The hologram expanded to show the full scope of the battle. Human ships that had appeared to be retreating or disabled were actually creating a three-dimensional maze of overlapping fields of fire. Enemy vessels that thought they were pursuing damaged targets found themselves caught in kill zones where multiple human ships could engage them simultaneously while remaining too dispersed to be effectively targeted in return. The battle's conclusion was decisive. The coalition forces, despite their technical advantages and specifically designed countermeasures, found themselves systematically dismantled by human forces that refused to fight according to any recognizable doctrine. Professor Talvar's scales had shifted to colors indicating deep fascination mixed with professional concern. "Lieutenant, what you're describing sounds less like traditional military strategy and more like hunting," Webb finished. "Yes, Professor. Human military doctrine is based on hunting rather than warfare. Most species develop combat strategies based on territorial disputes or resource conflicts between similar opponents. But humans developed as persistence hunters who specialized in taking down prey larger and stronger than themselves." The observation sent ripples of discussion through the alien cadets. Sarah could see representatives from prey species shifting uncomfortably in their seats, while the more predatory species studied the humans with new interest. A Krex warrior caste cadet stood up, his exoskeleton plates rustling. "Are you suggesting that humans view other species as prey rather than opponents?" Webb shook his head quickly. "Not other species, no. But threats, problems that need solving, enemies that need neutralizing, yes, we approach those the same way our ancestors approached hunting megafauna." He changed the display to show historical Earth footage of early human hunting tactics. The hologram depicted small groups of persistence hunters pursuing massive creatures across vast distances, using intelligence, coordination, and relentless pressure to bring down animals many times their size. "Persistence hunting means you don't try to overpower your target," Webb explained. "You exhaust it. You attack from unexpected angles, retreat when it responds, and keep applying pressure until it makes a mistake. Then you exploit that mistake completely." A Vorthak cadet near the front raised her hand. "But Lieutenant, this approach requires your forces to remain intact throughout extended operations. How do you maintain unit cohesion when your ships cannot survive direct confrontation?" Webb smiled. "That's where human pack hunting instincts become relevant. We don't fight as individuals, we fight as coordinated groups where each member has a specific role. Some ships serve as scouts, others as harassers, and still others as finishing units. When one element is threatened, the others adapt to maintain the hunt." He brought up new tactical displays showing human fleet formations that looked completely unlike anything the alien species used. Instead of hierarchical command structures with flagship coordination, human fleets operated more like interconnected networks, where each ship could function independently while contributing to overall objectives. The Zephyrian cadet who had spoken earlier chimed with what sounded like intellectual excitement. "This suggests human military organization developed along completely different evolutionary lines than other species. Most of us built armies based on territorial defense or resource competition." "Exactly," Webb agreed. "And that's why human ships don't have armor. Armor is for fighting. Our ships are built for hunting." Professor Talvar manipulated his own controls. bringing up comparative analyses of different species' military doctrines. The display now showed the fundamental philosophical differences between human and alien approaches to conflict. "This is remarkable," Talvar said. "Every other species in our alliance developed military strategies based on direct confrontation, modified by their specific biological and cultural advantages. But humans appear to have developed an entirely different approach to organized violence." A hegemony cadet's tentacles writhed with what Sarah's implants translated as nervous curiosity. "Professor, what are the implications for combined operations? How do human units integrate with Alliance forces when their basic approach to combat is fundamentally different?" Before Professor Talvar could respond, Webb activated his datapad again. "Actually, we've been working on that problem. Would you like to see some recent joint operations footage?" The display changed to show recent Alliance exercises where human forces had worked alongside alien units. The footage revealed coordination methods that seemed to merge different combat philosophies into something entirely new. "The key insight," Webb explained, "is that different approaches to combat can be complementary rather than conflicting. Alliance forces provide the anvil, human forces provide the hammer." The tactical displays showed Alliance fleets engaging enemy forces in traditional formations, their heavy armor and defensive systems allowing them to maintain position and absorb punishment. Meanwhile, human ships moved around the battle space like sharks, striking vulnerable targets and exploiting openings created by the steady pressure of Alliance firepower. Sarah watched the alien cadets studying these joint operations with obvious fascination. She could see them beginning to understand how human tactical doctrine might enhance rather than replace their own military traditions. A Terminus Guild cadet spoke up. "This suggests that human integration into the Alliance represents not just additional numbers, but an entirely new capability set." Webb nodded. "That's the idea. Most conflicts in galactic history have been decided by which side could build stronger defenses or more powerful weapons. But humans bring something different to the table. We bring the ability to redefine what the conflict is about in the first place." The classroom fell into thoughtful silence as hundreds of alien minds processed the implications of what they had learned. Sarah realized that this presentation had become more than just an explanation of human military doctrine. It had become a glimpse into how the galactic balance of power might shift when one species approached the fundamental problems of warfare from a completely different evolutionary perspective. Professor Talvar's scales shifted through several colors before settling on one that indicated professional satisfaction mixed with concern. "Lieutenant Webb, thank you for this illuminating presentation. I believe we all have much to consider about how different species can contribute unique capabilities to our collective defense." As the class began to disperse, Sarah noticed how the alien cadets were looking at their human colleagues now. The earlier confusion and concern had been replaced by something that looked like respect, mixed with caution. They had asked why human warships were missing armor. And they had learned that the question itself revealed assumptions about warfare that humans had never shared. Webb was surrounded by alien cadets asking follow-up questions, his patient explanations helping to bridge the gap between completely different approaches to solving the same fundamental problems of survival and victory. Sarah gathered her materials, reflecting on how this single class had changed not just alien perceptions of human capabilities, but human understanding of their own place in the galactic community. They weren't just another warrior species joining an alliance of fighters. They were hunters joining a community that had never learned to hunt, and that difference might prove to be exactly what the galaxy needed when it faced threats that couldn't be defeated by traditional military thinking. The question about missing armor had been answered, but it had revealed something much more significant about what humans brought to the galaxy beyond just their ships and weapons. They brought an entirely different way of thinking about problems that might seem impossible to solve. As she left the amphitheater, Sarah couldn't help but smile at the thought that humanity's greatest strength might turn out to be their willingness to ask completely different questions than everyone else had thought to ask. Human combat operations showed casualty rates that were orders of magnitude lower than what other species considered normal for military engagements. "The thing about not having armor," Webb said quietly, "is that it forces you to end fights quickly. When you can't afford to get hit, you get very good at making sure the other guy can't hit you. And when you can't afford prolonged engagements, you get very good at winning fast." The implications hung in the air like a challenge to everything the galactic military establishment thought they knew about warfare. Sarah realized that her fellow human cadets were sitting straighter now, their earlier discomfort replaced by a quiet pride in their species' approach to solving impossible problems. But she also noticed the way some of the alien cadets were looking at the humans now, with a mixture of respect and something that might have been concern about what kind of allies they had invited into their galactic community, or create lasting misunderstandings. The way humanity was perceived by their alien allies might depend on how this question was answered. The silence grew heavier. Then, from the back of the human section, a voice spoke up with the kind of casual confidence that could change everything or make everything worse.